Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on whether you're watching us live or you're watching a recording, and also depending on the time zone you're at. My name is Tito de Moraes. I'm the founder of an internet safety project that I founded in 2003, so roughly 18 years ago. Looks like it was a century ago. And it's an internet safety project that aims to help parents, families, schools, teachers, and communities to promote the safe use of information technologies by kids, tweens, teens, and even adults, actually. Uh, since we celebrated our 18th birthday back in March, we started a second season of MiudosSegurosNa.Net, which translates into Kids Safe on the Net. And we started a second series of these live MiudosSegurosNa.Net live show. And that's what we've been doing since then with weekly shows, usually on Tuesday evenings, with guests not only from Portugal but also from Brazil, and occasionally an English speaking guest, which is the case today, and that's why I'm in English and not in Portuguese usually. Uh, we are broadcasting to Facebook, to LinkedIn, to YouTube, and Twitter. I'm talking to you from Portugal, from a small city called Rio Tinto in the surrounding areas of Porto. And I also uh, like to know where our guests are speaking to us from. I got a note that there's a background noise. I'm not hearing it. If any of you is hearing a background noise, please let me know in the comments, and we'll see if I can do anything about it. So feel free to use the comment box to let us know where you are following us from, and to leave also your question. For today, the topic is educating for a video game culture. And we have a guest from Italy, Alessandro Soriani. Alessandro Soriani is a digital citizenship education expert for the Council of Europe and has written and published a book with the Council of Europe that we'll be talking about in today's session. Let me tell you a bit about Alessandro by reading a bio that he sent me. Alessandro is PhD in Pedagogical Sciences and in Information and Communication Studies, a title obtained at the University of Bologna's Department of Educational Studies, in joint supervision with the École Doctorale 276 at Médias on the Sorbonne-Nouvelle Paris 3. Research Fellow of the Bologna's Department of Education Studies. His research explored the influence of relationships that develop within digital environments and on the social climate of learning environments. I lost myself somewhere here. Okay. And the development of inclusive school policies in the context of social violence. His scientific interests are ICT and media in educational and pedagogical contexts. He works as a consultant for the Council of Europe in digital citizenship education projects. He also works as a teacher, trainer, and facilitator for youth participatory processes. And let me welcome Alessandro. Hi, Alessandro, welcome.
Good evening, and thank you, Tito, for having me invited here.
Okay, it's a great pleasure to have you with us. We actually met some 4 years ago in Zagreb, in Croatia, on a project on bullying project from the European Schoolnet called Enable.
Enable, right?
Yeah, and that was 4 years ago, and that time flies. Uh,
Absolutely.
and we have also some guests with us. Billy Carvalho is a regular. He's saying that he's hearing some crickets and he
Mm.
is talking to us from Vila Nova de Gaia. He thought it was his phones, but funny enough, I'm not hearing any background noise besides the dog of a neighbor that sometimes starts to bark. But that's as far as noise that I get. Let me also say that today we'll be talking about, as the title of the say, educating for a video game culture. And children, teenagers, and young people today live in a world profoundly influenced by technology and digital media. It has become almost impossible not to come into contact with phones, tablets, laptops, console games, and other forms of technology, whether for educational or entertainment purposes. Video games are an important aspect of this digital landscape, and in recent years they have grown very rapidly in terms of popularity, relevance, and complexity. Promoting a video game culture means generating a pedagogical reflection around video games, thinking about them as a cultural tool able to offer opportunities not only to have fun, but also to think, learn, and develop as a person. And as I've said, Alessandro is the author of this book, published by the Council of Europe, called entitled "Educating for a Video Game Culture: A Map for Teachers and Parents." And I'll also be publishing in the comments the URL where you can get a copy of this book. Alessandro, we'll start by asking you uh, who you are. Okay, I read a biographical note, but let us know a bit more about you. Where do you live? I know that you have become a father recently, and you must be terribly proud of it. Tell us a bit more about yourself.
Yes. Yeah. First of all, I would like to remember the fact that the publication is completely free, so you can download it um, freely. About me, well, you said quite a lot actually, but I would like to add only the fact that. I work in the University of Bologna, and my background is a pedagogist. And the research field where I'm moving myself are the technology in the education systems and a reflection around media literacy and media education. Right now, I'm covering and working on a research about the communication between schools and families and how technology affected this relationship.
Mhm.
And this work where about we are going to talk about this evening is a publication that I've been working on since the past 2 years actually, and that has been born between the hat under the hat of this big project of the Council of Europe, which is the Digital Citizenship Education Project. And I don't know if you already talked about this bigger project, but if you want to
Actually,
share.
we've had Victor Tomé, which I think is
Okay.
also your colleague at the Council of Europe. We've had also Elizabeth Milovidov, and
Okay.
Janice Richardson as guests, not on MiudosSegurosNa.Net, but on another show. And we
Mm-hmm.
spoke also about the digital citizenship education project, the handbook, and several other things. But one of the
Okay.
questions that
Perfect.
I had,
That's perfect.
and I'll introduce a question later on, is how does this fit into that project? But before that, I would like to ask you, how did you got your interest in studying video games and on digital citizenship education? Was there a particular trigger, or
Well, I
tell me
always
about
have been a video game player,
it?
and this topic interest me so much, and I I grew up basically playing video games, and I played since I was a child, and starting studying and working in the field of education and pedagogy. Something clicked inside of me, and starting watching this medium under more scientific and critical point of view. And I start working on video games in education when I started working on my final thesis in media education and e-learning, and I was working in France in Clémy with at the time the chief of Clémy was Evelyn Levort, and she helped me in developing my research, and then I guess that the things have just evolved.
Okay, okay. So you have also been working at the Council of Europe in other books and projects. Can you tell us a bit about your work at the Council of Europe?
Okay. Yeah, I started working with the Council of Europe in I think 2014 under the head of the Pestalozzi program. And back at the time, we were basically working on teacher training programs about human rights education. And when the program has been closed, I joined the Digital Citizenship Education Group, and we started in 2016. And together with Vitor, Tomé, Elizabeth Midavidov, Janice Richardson, and other colleagues, and we developed this sort of framework of digital citizenship education, which is not actually something to substitute the DigComp European framework. So that is more related to digital competencies, while this one has more to do with how you can use digital tools, and you can engage in the digital world and exercise your rights as citizens, and promote human rights, and promote respect, and use the technology ethically and savvily. And within this framework, many projects have been started. This publication is kind of the last one event.
Okay. Meanwhile, António João Silva has also joined us. He says boa noite, which is good night, buonanotte in Italian, I believe. And
Obrigado.
okay. And the next question is, we thought that we should go through the book and talk about it. And I'll start by asking, what is a video game culture, Alessandro?
Well, you said it early, actually, but the idea was to go beyond the use of the use of video games as tools for learning, because I believe that one of the main issue that tackle the world of video games and how people perceive it is a big lack of awareness about this medium, and especially in teachers and parents, this lack of awareness can be the cause of mistrust and stigmatization of this medium. I don't know what is the situation in Portugal, but in Italy, it's very common to hear media on television or on paper, on newspapers, saying that something bad has happened because of video games. So it is quite actually common, but I believe that the reason of this kind of materials published on the media is that the adult world has very little knowledge and awareness of the potentialities of this medium, and also of the actual risks of this medium. And this lack of knowledge results in a closure when it comes to a relationship with the youngsters. And this closure, these walls that separates between that separates adults from youngsters, hinder a dialogue between these two subjects. And the way to move on and finally benefit from this medium is to promote dialogue between adults, educators, teachers, and players, and eventually consider the video game as really a cultural tool, full of opportunities, with some risks, of course, but also a useful tool that can be used to learn, to develop as a person, and to engage in meaningful communities. So this was the logic between underneath the publication.
Actually, I think the situation that you mentioned regarding Italy, it's almost the same everywhere. Video games have a bad rap, and they are blamed for almost every violent event that happens. People tend to say that they have been inspired by violent video games, and that's the reputation usually that games have. So parents and teachers need a map because they don't know anything almost about video games. So how does this get to into the 9 or the 10 domains of digital citizenship?
Yes, the idea is that I will talk about to answer this question. I need to talk about the structure of this book. So it is a very short book. It's not more than 60 pages, and basically it is divided in 3 sections, or as I wanted to call them, world, like the Super Mario world. There is world 1 with level 1, level 1, 2. It's a sort of a video game structure, and so the publication is divided in these 3 big worlds, which is the first one, the things to know about video games. The second world is the potential risks of video games. And the third one is the potential benefits of video gaming. And you can see that there are the small subchapter, the paragraphs that are discussing a specific subtopic, and at the end of each level you can find the links between that topic addressed and the domains of digital citizenship education. So in this case, we have the first one, the very first one. So the fact that video game, when you talk about video games in general, actually it's an exercise of simplification and reduction, which is counterproductive when, if you want to discuss it with the right amount of critics and complexity. And so at the end of this level, you have some tips, some things to know. So did you know that many online games allow players to interact through a real-time voice chat system and talk to each other like a phone call? And so some key facts to attract your attention, and then the links to the domain. In this case, the domain is the Media and Information Literacy domain. And there is some guiding questions that allow people to reflect and consider the topic in a wider, under a wider angle. So let's say I recognize that video games are complex and diversified medium, rich in terms of the variety and experiences that can ignite for them. And then, are all games equal? Does it make sense to talk about video games in general? So let's say that the reader, through these insights and little windows pointed out to this bigger project, can do some exercises of self-reflection to see if he is or she is interested also in reading that particular chapter or not. And
this can be also interesting for instance, a reading club. Where
sorry,
people
can you repeat?
This can also be interesting for a reading club. People, a club where people get together to read a particular book and to discuss a book. These are great starters for icebreakers for a conversation around the book and for
Absolutely.
reflection around the book. I can see this, for instance, being done in parents' meeting and teachers' meetings and things like that. Very interesting.
Yeah, and that's basically the angle of where we try to show the connection between the two projects. In general, I think that dealing with media with an open approach and being attentive to what the different medias and the different opportunities that technology offers to digital citizenship is the attitude that every digital citizen should have. And video games is part of this world, is part of the infosphere, and it's definitely one of the biggest entertainment industry in the world. And it's growing and growing and growing.
Bigger than the motion pictures already.
Absolutely, and it will become one of the main industry in the next years. It is already one of the biggest industry in humankind. And
so can you summarize for us what we should know about video games? Okay, the first thing is that we shouldn't talk about video games in general, because there are several types of devices, different types of games, and things like that. But can you give us the book in the
Yeah,
indexes
absolutely.
that show.
I will give you an overview. The
Mhm.
second level of the word one is where I tackle some data about the market, the world of
Mhm.
video game as an industry, which is one of the strongest industry. I just mentioned it,
Yeah, yeah. Mhm.
and also the phenomenon of esport.
Yeah. Mhm.
The third one
Actually, in
is
Portugal, esports is becoming also very big. We already have esports on main sports programming, and we now have TV channels specific for esports,
oh wow,
Portuguese
wow.
esports and international esports that are available on cable. So it's
Oh,
quite an industry.
yeah, yeah, yeah. In Italy, we still don't have it, but it's just a matter of
Mhm.
time, I think.
Yeah.
Um, then I talk about the video game community,
Mhm.
which the idea is that the act of playing is not only the act of playing, is
Mhm.
composed. The experience of being a gamer is composed by multiple experiences, one of which is video gaming. But there are, after the video game is shut off, the players used to engage in online communities to discuss about their experiences and to build participative culture, as Jenkins used to say. And
An interesting aspect of that is interest that has risen from, for instance, Japanese culture, that has risen from video games as well, and also the another phenomenon that has risen, I believe, from there, the cosplay phenomena also. It's an example of communities that start from video games and have a life of their own, basically.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And the fourth part is that it's basically possible to play video games by almost any devices. So
Mhm.
there is a panoramic of the possible devices. So the idea is to have a publication addressed really literally to anyone, also to
Mhm.
someone who's not really into the market, but also people who already are approaching the medium and wants to know more.
Okay.
Um, the fifth level is talk about the concept of flow in the gaming. So the idea is that when imagine the dialogue, the classical dialogue between a mother or a father and a child, and the parent wants to interrupt the act of playing because dinner is ready, let's say,
Right.
but it's impossible because the player
Yeah.
is so engaged into the match, into the experience of
Mhm.
play, that he is or she is in a state of flow, um, which is a sort of maximum state of concentration and focus
Mhm.
that almost isolates the person from the outer world. No, it happens to me when I, for instance, when I analyzes data from interviews. When I look at the Excel's sheets,
Mhm.
I completely, it can happen anything that
Yeah, yeah.
I
Mhm.
just don't realize it. So that's the kind of idea of the flow. Um, and trying understand these dynamics can help parents to relate with this kind of situation, and to having this um, proactive way of moderating the experiences. For instance, it's not about allowing person to have one more minute and then shut off, but rather, or
Mhm.
30 minutes and then shut off the game, but rather finish the match, and then we can go having dinner together. So trying to understand the way video game works can really help you in developing strategies to overcome these kind of conflicts.
Okay.
And the following chapter talks about the online stores and the online services that are actually the way with the video game industry deliver video games to the big public. And the former box, physical box with the disc inside is still a thing, but there are many other possible ways to buy video games and play it. For instance,
one of the complaints that I've heard from my children is that video games now are subscription based, and that means that you don't own anything, because if the game is on a platform that you don't control, so if they want to remove the game, they remove the game, and there is nothing you can do about it. And one of my son, the oldest one, says, "I'm going to stop buying video games because, in fact, I don't own anything. You know, it's no longer a model in which you have a package and you have the game. Nowadays, platforms want you not only to buy the game, but then to buy other things related to the game, and not everyone wants it."
That's the point. And well, there's so much to say about it, but this chapter actually addressed this argument, this topic. And this is why also it is linked to the concept of consumer awareness. Because let's read the questions together. Are you aware of the gaming services that your students or your children use every day? Are you curious about them? Do you understand it? Do you know what is the model, economical model behind it? So it is important also to explore this part. The 7th chapter is about the PEGI code, which I hope that it's well, famous enough, but it's about the rating.
I have my doubts.
Okay. It's about the rating. The rating of video games according to the right age that can be suitable for that game, and also there are black icons that symbolize the harmful content that the video game can contain. So we have violence, bad language, discrimination, drugs, gambling. Okay. And then there are valuable links if you want to explore more. So you have the original PEGI, the ISPE, which is the video game industry, European video game industry website, Common Sense Media, of course, Ask About Games, Pedagogical, but also Games in Schools, which have done a remarkable job. And then the final chapter is about parental control tools. So just to let the people know about the potentiality of moderate through a software control the way that children or students can play. You can apply filters to the kind of based on age. So if your son or if your daughter has 7 years old, you can apply a filter, and only the games rated PEGI 3 or 7 can be played. So it's quite useful. And also with some parental control tools, you can also exercise a time limit. Of course, using that is quite okay. Of course, it's efficient, but pedagogically speaking, it's always better to talk through and discuss through the timings and to the right amount of time management connected to the use of video games, rather than imposing it only through a software, which is always well,
always be bypassed, and software does not replace parenting, you know.
yeah,
So,
exactly.
so before we move on to talk about the risks, let me tell you that the persons that are watching and following the show, they can leave their comments or questions, and I'll bring them to the screen, as I have with like this, as I have done with comments from Abilio and from others. But to let us know where you're following us from. We're always happy to learn where our viewers are. And so now moving into the risks. What are the risks that children can be exposed to online, basically?
Absolutely. So the chapter connected to the risk is a panoramic about the possible harmful content and risk connected to the use of video games. So you have the microtransaction and the in-app purchases, where that you already mentioned before.
Right.
So let me go through it. Okay. And the online hate speech and video games connection. So the fact that gaming communities can be the driver of online hate speech, discrimination dynamics. Recently, in the past days, there are a lot of discussion with actually with quite a remarkable set of argumentation from female players and female streamers that are discriminated by the gaming community, which is well, at least the noisy part of the internet is composed by mainly male people, and they are struggling in fighting against this hate that the community shows towards them. And there are some beautiful contribution from, for instance, journalists like Alana Pierce, which is one of the most famous female streamer, that she's actually bringing on this battle against hate speech and discrimination. So there is actually some really good examples to talk about. But also there are quite a lot of bad things, and of course.
Abiru is saying that he's still hearing the crickets, and I think it might be from my microphone, and I'm going to change microphones to see if I can solve the problem.
Okay.
But he asks, the risks of video games being that now we are even entering to the virtual world with more and more reality. So does that mean that video games are becoming almost like a parallel world? Can you comment on that while I change the microphone? If I'm not heard immediately, you keep on talking about the
Absolutely.
and I'll be back in a minute.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, one of the risks about video games is that and it is addressed, actually, thanks for your question. It is addressed in the next paragraph, which is the violent content and the harmful content in general. But not only that, but also the representation that these games offer in terms of minorities, gender, people with disabilities, people with other people with representing minorities, for instance, but also people from the gay community or the lesbian community or the LGBT plus community. So there is a problem of representation of this kind of these people in the world of video gaming. This problem is stereotypes, a stereotyped version of these minorities, if not a problem of lacking of representation. So a part of the problem of the violence in video games, there is also this problem. And luckily, we have really good example of counter narratives. So we have video games that are not violent at all, and they are actually using other mechanics apart from the suppression of enemies to ignite the interest of the players. And these are wonderful examples. For instance, like The Witness, or I don't know, or Celeste, for instance, are wonderful examples of these kind of non-violent kind of games. But there are also video games that use violence to actually address a critique to our society and to our context, our reality, let's say, no? And this is the case, for instance, of one of the latest video games published by Sony, which is The Last of Us Part 2 and The Last of Us Part 1 also, which is a perfect representation of a good contextualization of violence in video games. By playing that video games, which is extremely violent, you feel that violence is put inside the video games because of a reason, and that reason is make the players reflect about the necessity of revenge and the way revenge consume people and bring only bad things. So you can actually have examples of like in the other media. So you have violent movies that are violence for the sake of being violent, and the other movies that use the violence to tell a message and to express some values. So like, for instance, I don't know if you saw Dogville, which is an extremely violent movie. I find it extremely
Anguishing.
Anguishing, exactly. But that kind of violence is used to vehiculate a message, and so so you have these examples also in the video games industry. So, of course, for a better explanation, you can spend hours talking about this. So I will go. And I already talked about the representation of stereotypes. And then there is the video game addiction. So this chapter particularly talks about the necessity of better understand what is video game addiction, which is a serious disorder and that has been recognized by the World Health Organization, but is an addiction, a comportamental addiction, not an addiction like to a substance, to some drugs or some. So it is exactly. So there is a sensible difference, and most often it is caused by external factors. So, for instance, depression, or I don't know.
Actually, I think that sometimes the pathological use of video games or the abusive use of video games or video game addiction is more a sign that there's something wrong, there's some underlying problem with the child above or below, than actually the problem with the video game. It's like an escape from reality that the child finds. And if you remove that, it can even be more dangerous, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. So sometimes there is a problem of misinterpretation of this disease, and sometimes it's so as the cause, while actually it is a symptom. So it's better to treat this argument very carefully, and to let them recognized by specialists and doctors.
Exactly.
But of course, the cases of video game disease are very few compared to the signals that we might have. So also this one is a very delicate matter that must be addressed with attention.
Cautious.
And caution, absolutely. After each word, there is a sort of walkthrough with the highlights of the most important elements of the chapter. So this is the walkthrough for word 2. And after that, there is the final word, the potential benefits of video games.
Before we go into the benefits, can you let us know? I mean, the risks are so diverse that it's difficult to find a solution for all of them. But are there any ways that, in some way, the book addresses on how to avoid situations in which the video game can become harmful for a child?
Can you repeat the question, please?
If the book addresses ways in which how we can avoid a video game to become harmful for a child.
Okay, well, not directly, because I really don't write recipe and decalogues. So I also warn in taking for granted formulas and the perfect recipe for using video games. So most often these kind of suggestions are quite useful, because they provide actually hints and knowledge to practitioners, to parents, to teachers. But sometimes using and applying blindly rules without really understanding what I am managing, what is the medium, or what are the consequences in applying blindly these rules without really reasoning about it. I think that can lead to other risks.
Yep.
So the idea is really to have adults, by reading this, can shape their own idea about this world and to better understand it, and by better understanding, coping better with the kind of problems that can arise, that and always arise when it comes to youngsters, children doing something. It is tell me a field of interest of a youngster which cannot cause problems. So it is impossible to find it.
And it's also a generational conflict, I believe. So, what are then the benefits? Can you give us a quick overview of the benefits that can arise from the use of video games besides entertainment and education?
Exactly. Well, the first is the potential benefits for video games is that there are some games that are in a way not I don't want to say better than others, but that have much opportunities for a meaningful experience rather than others. So these games excels in many areas, and in this first chapter, I will go and describe which are the elements that may transform a video game into a really good video game. As James Paul Guy used to say, so he talked about good video games, and the fact that some games are good video games, and these good games can bring something to the world of education. And here I discussed that there are some games which have wonderful game mechanics that really are almost an epiphany for the players. So I also make some examples. So I already talked about Celeste, which is these games where this girl has to climb a mountain, the Mount Celeste, and the experience of frustration and of determination that this girl lives is also transferred to the players, because the game is really difficult, and when you achieve it, you really feel the
excitement,
the excitement and the reward for being able to do that. So it is wonderful crafted, the way that game mechanics intertwine into the player experience. So another aspect is the storytelling, the quality of storytelling, the quality of interactions. So for instance, there is this game called Keep Talking and Nobody Will Explode, that it actually needs two players, and one player sits in front of the computer, and the other player sits next to the computer without watching the screen. And this second player has papers where there are written the instruction for defusing a bomb, and the two players needs to talk, literally talk, and
non-stop.
Exactly, and so I see that there is this bomb with this blue button. And the other player, okay, the blue button. Then can you tell me how many batteries there are into the bomb? 3 batteries. Okay, so blue button, 3 batteries. You need to roll 3 times the
Nice.
potentiometer, and so the two players interact and help each other to defusing the bomb, and it's wonderful example of interaction between players. Of course, the quality of aesthetics,
Sure.
and I give some examples like Journey or Shushell or Greece, for instance, which is a wonderful design game. The topic approach. So we have this game called Bury Me My Love, which is the story of a migrant that from Syria needs to go to Germany. And you play the role of her husband, and you interact with her by short SMS. And you can see and follow her journey in Europe and give her advices. And this game, it is inspired by a real story coming from an article published by, I think, Le Monde. And this game is also being developed with the real witnesses and real refugees. So sometimes video games can really open windows to other realities, especially other realities that are quite far away from the kind of players that the average players that are out there.
That brings us to an interesting topic. I had a note here that I wanted to talk with you about, which is serious games, which is basically. Can you tell us about some games that fit this category of serious games and that can be used to foster citizenship, like the one that you've just mentioned?
Yes. I will take I will start answering the question by quite maybe far away, but I promise I will reach to that. When I talk about learning from video games, I will in the publication I will talk about three kind of approaches in using video games for education context. The first one is the direct use of video games. So let's say using specifically designed products to talk about specific arguments. So we have, for instance, Fold It, which is a game started to play with the proteins structures that can be used to teach about the protein structures, for instance, no? So use specific games for specific argument, a direct use of video games. There is also another way of using video games, which is which is here in level 3.4, which use the concept of tangential learning. So, for instance, tangential learning is watching a video, watching a film, or playing a video games, or reading a comic, and this media content is approaching a topic. So let's say in God of War, the story is of a Spartan warrior that fights against the god of the Olympus, and players can be so engaged into the story of God of War that actually starts documenting themselves and study and learn something about the Greek mythology. And this process of self-learning can be fostered by proposing to the people the right video games. So God of War is just an example, but there is also Assassin's Creed series that the Assassin's Creed origin in particular is set in the ancient Egypt, and it also offers some insights of historical facts So the game itself, it fosters the players to go outside and learn about and make a connection between what they saw in the video games and what they can learn. There is a third way of using video games for learning, which is the critical approach. And this approach foresee the use of video games to develop critical thinking. So, for instance, the example that I was giving to you when I was talking about the violence in The Last of Us. So proposing that kind of content to students, of course, I'm talking about students with the right age, and make them reflect about the values that are driven by the experiences of game, by reading, for instance, and analyzing the representation of and the stereotypes that are driven by the video games. So this kind of meta reflection about the act of playing. The last one, I told you that there are three, but actually are four. It's use them to foster creativity. So there are many games that can be used to as platform to create other games. So, for instance, we have the RPG Maker, a video game that is a sort of video game that allow players to create video games. So, like also Dreams for PlayStation or Super Mario Maker, where people can create their own levels. Or in the next month, Nintendo will publish a Nintendo Labo making. I can't remember the name, but it's a sort of software to create video games and which help students to children to create their own video games. And that's basically it. I don't know if you have any other questions, if I were clear enough.
Actually, there is one from Fernando Ferreira. He's asking, video games can be good, yes, with control, to motivate students and to develop TIC, which is information technology, information and communication technologies know-how. We have this culture. It's a question. Fernando Ferreira is from the school in the middle of Portugal, in a land called Oliveira de Asmães. So, is this culture in place, or is something that needs to be fostered?
Well, it needs to be fostered, of course, but I think that the time is right. There are a lot of there is a lot of research in academic field, under many fields of the academia. There are many journalists that do talk about video games with a particular point of view that is respectful, that go into the direction of also creating one's own preference and critical perception about the medium. So there are good examples up there, more than 10 years ago, I think. The market is changing. Bad things will always occur, but I'm positive because there are really a lot of good examples. So there is still a lot of things to do, a lot of work to do, especially in informal education systems. But there are, I see a change that probably will happen.
So, if people want to know more about the book. They can download it, and I'll leave the address once again, and I'll also put it in the comments. It's freely downloadable, so there's no price to it. And in the end, as Alessandro was showing us, there is a list of all the games that are mentioned within the book. So just go to click on the link that I'm going to leave once again in the comment and download the book and have a look at it, read it, and try to involve yourselves in this video game culture. Uh, if there aren't any additional questions, we already have passed the 1 hour. I would like to thank Alessandro for being with us for this hour, talking and with us about his book. Remember that the book is called Educating for Video Game Culture, a map for teachers and parents. So if you are a teacher or a parent, this book is definitely for you. And just visit the link and download the book. So, Alessandro, thank you very much for being with us and for having accepted my invitation. It was a pleasure to have you as a guest, and I look forward to meet you in person again because I'm fed up of being at home
Yeah,
with
yeah.
this with the
Hopefully
pandemic.
in Portugal.
Yes, that would be great. So thank you once again, and to all of you that were watching. Remember, if you didn't start from the beginning, the recording will be made available immediately after the end of this transmission. Ciao, Alessandro. Good evening, everybody, and see you next Tuesday. Ciao.
Good evening.